Don't be fooled by his silence. He can't stop thinking about you, Carl Jung. When he goes quiet, it's tempting to assume the worst, to assume he's done, that he's detached, that the silence is proof he never cared as deeply as you thought. The mind starts spinning in the dark, filling the emptiness with fear, because silence can feel final. Silence feels like a closed door, like a verdict. You start wondering if you imagined the connection, if you misread everything. But silence doesn't always mean absence. Silence doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes silence is the loudest confession a person makes when they don't know how to speak. The truth is, when someone is genuinely done with you, they don't need silence to process. They don't need distance to gain clarity. People who have truly moved on don't perform detachment. They simply detach. There's no strategy, no mystery, no tension. They don't need to disappear to appear strong. They don't need to create space to be missed. They're at peace, and peace has no theatrics, but silence that feels heavy, silence that feels calculated, silence that shifts suddenly and sharply. That kind of silence is almost never about indifference. That silence is a mask, a shield, a strategy, not always consciously, but powerfully. Because when someone is still emotionally attached, silence becomes their weapon and their refuge. It becomes the place they hide from their own vulnerability. Think about it. If someone really didn't care anymore, why would they need to vanish instead of just communicating? Why would they need to pull away instead of simply letting things fade naturally? Why would they monitor your reactions, watch your stories, keep tabs through mutual friends, or show up at the exact moment you start to let go? That isn't indifference. That's fear disguised as distance. Carl Jung once said, "What you resist not only persists, but grows in size." And that's exactly what happens inside the silence. The more someone tries to suppress what they feel, the more those feelings push back. Suppressed emotions don't die, they deepen. They expand in the quiet. They become louder when no one is around to drown them out. There's a certain type of silence that isn't closure. It's a conflict. A person can battle themselves in ways you will never see. On the outside, they appear calm, collected, and unaffected. But internally, they're fighting the tension between pride and emotion, between the image they want to protect and the feelings they're terrified to expose. He might be telling himself he's done. He might be trying to convince himself he's moved on. He may even go out of his way to act like nothing ever touched him deeply. But there's a reason silence feels heavy instead of empty. There's a reason it feels like waiting instead of ending. That weight you feel isn't imagination. It's emotional residue. It's the echo of something unfinished. Often silence isn't punishment. It's protection. Protection from saying something he's not ready to admit. Protection from exposing a vulnerability he doesn't know how to manage. Protection from confronting the truth he's not ready to face. Because admitting he still feels something means risking rejection. It means risking the loss of control. It means risking being seen. And for so many men, vulnerability has been taught as weakness. They've been taught to hold it in, bury it deep, stay composed, and stay silent. They don't know how to say, "I'm hurting," or "I'm scared," or "I still care." So instead, they go quiet. They disappear. They choose silence over exposure. But the silence they choose doesn't free them. It traps them. It becomes a cage where their unspoken thoughts echo louder than any words ever could. At first, silence feels like power. It feels like control. It feels like strength. But give it time, and silence becomes uncomfortable. It becomes restless. It becomes pressure, because silence is where everything hidden comes to the surface. That's why he might look perfectly fine at first. He goes out. He posts pictures. He smiles for the camera. He surrounds himself with noise. Noise distracts. Noise numbs. Noise delays the truth, but noise cannot last forever. At some point, the music stops. The messages slow down. The nights get quiet. And he's forced to sit alone with the one voice he's been trying to outrun, his own. And in that stillness, reality sets in. The silence he thought would help him detach instead forces him to confront what he's been avoiding. He starts wondering if you've stopped thinking about him. He starts noticing the absence of your energy. He checks for your name and realizes it's not there. He waits for a message that never comes. He looks at your profile differently, not for validation, but for proof that he hasn't faded in your world. And when he finds nothing, the silence he built becomes unbearable. Because when someone is emotionally attached, silence does not bring peace. It brings clarity. It reveals the truth. It exposes what pretending tried to cover. The break doesn't hit when the goodbye happens. The break hits when the attention stops, when the presence disappears, when the reassurance is gone, when he realizes you're not orbiting his world anymore. That's when the silence stops feeling like a weapon and starts feeling like loss. And here's the part most people miss. Silence doesn't just reveal what he feels. It reveals what you feel too. Silence forces truth on both sides. It becomes a mirror reflecting what was real and what was performance. It forces emotional honesty. Not from you, from him. If he were truly done, he wouldn't need your silence to test himself. He wouldn't need to disappear to gain control. He wouldn't need distance to breathe. He'd be gone with no tension, no performance, no echo. So don't rush to fill the silence. Don't chase. Don't beg for clarity. Real strength is not in speaking, it's withholding. It's in allowing the silence to reveal what words never could. Because silence, when there's still love underneath, becomes a storm inside the person who's trying to pretend the sky is clear. And sometimes, the loudest confession is the one spoken in absolute quiet. That's why he might look perfectly fine at first. He goes out, he posts pictures, he smiles for the camera, he surrounds himself with noise. Noise distracts, noise numbs, noise delays the truth. But noise cannot last forever. At some point, the music stops. The messages slow down. The nights get quiet. And he's forced to sit alone with the one voice he's been trying to outrun, his own. And in that stillness, reality sets in. The silence he thought would help him detach instead forces him to confront what he's been avoiding. He starts wondering if you've stopped thinking about him. He starts noticing the absence of your energy. He checks for your name and realizes it's not there. He waits for a message that never comes. He looks at your profile differently, not for validation, but for proof that he hasn't faded in your world. And when he finds nothing, the silence he built becomes unbearable. Because when someone is emotionally attached, silence does not bring peace. It brings clarity. It reveals the truth. It exposes what pretending tried to cover. The break doesn't hit when the goodbye happens. The break hits when the attention stops, when the presence disappears, when the reassurance is gone, when he realizes you're not orbiting his world anymore. That's when the silence stops feeling like a weapon and starts feeling like loss. And here's the part most people miss. Silence doesn't just reveal what he feels. It reveals what you feel too. Silence forces truth on both sides. It becomes a mirror reflecting what was real and what was performance. It forces emotional honesty. Not from you, from him. If he were truly done, he wouldn't need your silence to test himself. He wouldn't need to disappear to gain control. He wouldn't need distance to breathe. He'd be gone with no tension, no performance, no echo. So don't rush to fill the silence. Don't chase. Don't beg for clarity. Real strength is not in speaking, it's withholding. It's in allowing the silence to reveal what words never could. Because silence, when there's still love underneath, becomes a storm inside the person who's trying to pretend the sky is clear. And sometimes the loudest confession is the one spoken in absolute quiet. Silence becomes the stage where truth begins to surface. Because when the conversation stops, when the checking in ends, when the familiar rhythm of connection suddenly breaks, the mind becomes an echo chamber. Everything that was ignored rises to the surface. Everything that was suppressed begins to speak. Without the distraction of your presence, he's left with unanswered questions and unresolved emotions. At first, he may feel confident in his silence. He may feel like he has the upper hand, like he's protecting himself, like distance means control. He tells himself he's doing the right thing by withdrawing. He may even feel a temporary sense of relief, believing he has finally loosened the emotional knot between you. But as time passes, the silence he chose becomes something he never expected: a mirror. Silence reflects back everything he tried to avoid, every moment he dismissed, every emotion he buried, every piece of vulnerability he covered with pride. He begins to replay the memories he thought he could forget. He starts to wonder if he misunderstood you, if he misjudged the connection, if he walked away from something he wasn't ready to lose. And slowly the silence stops feeling like strength. It starts to feel like uncertainty, like doubt, like fear. He starts asking himself questions he never thought he'd have to ask. Why does he still think about you? Why does he feel that pull instead of closure? Why does he still check your page, hoping not for proof that you're unhappy, but terrified of it, that you're doing better without him? Carl Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." This is where silence transforms into confrontation. The quiet forces him to face the unconscious. The feelings he pretended weren't there. The attachment he thought he could outrun. The emotional truth he avoided with distractions. He may not admit it out loud. He may never speak of it to anyone. But internally, silence becomes a reckoning because he starts to realize something he didn't expect. Letting go and losing are not the same thing. It's easy to walk away from someone when you think they'll always be there, lingering in your orbit, waiting to be missed, ready to return. But when that illusion shatters, when you pull back, when you stop reaching out, when the energy he was once fed by disappears, that's when it hits him. It hits him that you're gone, not physically, but emotionally. You're no longer holding space for him. You're no longer available. You're no longer an option he can return to when pride gets heavy and loneliness becomes sharp. And that realization isn't gentle. It's a silent collapse that happens in private when the world is quiet and the distractions fade. That's when silence becomes grief. Not the grief of losing a relationship, but the grief of losing someone they assumed would always remain connected. Because emotional attachment doesn't vanish when communication ends. It intensifies. It concentrates. It becomes undeniable when presence is removed instead of being reduced. He thought silence would protect him. He thought silence would give him control. But instead, silence exposes him. Because silence, real silence, doesn't numb emotions. It amplifies them. You see when someone is still attached. They don't disappear because they're done. They disappear because they don't know how to stay without losing themselves. They don't know how to say they care without feeling weak. They don't know how to ask for help without feeling afraid. So they choose silence, not as closure, but as a shield. And that shield works for a while. But the longer the silence continues, the heavier it becomes. He starts noticing things he never paid attention to before. How he still remembers the sound of your voice, the small details about your life, the softness you brought into his world. He remembers the comfort of your presence, the safe space you created, the way you listened, the way you understood him without him needing to explain. And he begins to wonder what he walked away from, what he let go of. Whether he misinterpreted the conflict and mistook it for incompatibility, whether he tried to end something that wasn't meant to be finished. Silence forces him to confront the difference between relief and regret. Regret doesn't arrive loudly. It sneaks in through the quiet. It shows up in unexpected places. When he hears a song that takes him back to a moment. When he sees something that reminds him of you. When he laughs and then suddenly feels the emptiness beneath it. He realizes that what he misses isn't the relationship itself. It's the connection, the rare, unrepeatable feeling of being understood without effort. That's the part you don't see, because he won't show it. He won't say it. Pride won't let him. Silence becomes his armor. Silence becomes his story. He convinces himself that reaching out would reopen something he doesn't know how to handle. He tells himself, time will fix it. But time doesn't heal what's never faced. Time magnifies what's unresolved. And while he is wrestling with himself, you begin to grow. You start rebuilding your life. You start remembering who you were before the heartbreak. You rediscover your worth without needing validation. Slowly, the silence that felt like pain begins to transform into power. You stop checking. You stop waiting. You stop wondering. You begin to feel peace where there was once longing. You learn to breathe without him. You realize that silence isn't emptiness. It's space. Space for healing. Space for clarity. Space for becoming. He thought silence would keep you tied. But silence set you free. And that freedom, the freedom of letting go without bitterness, without revenge, without noise, is what shakes him more than anything else. Because emotional maturity is not proven by how loud you can speak, but how gracefully you can remain silent. The moment you stop looking back is the moment he begins to. The moment you stop holding on is the moment he feels himself losing grip. That's when the silence he chose becomes the silence he can't escape. And that's when the real story begins. Not with words, not with arguments, not with explanations, but with truth. Truth that cannot be hidden forever. Because silence doesn't erase emotional attachment. It reveals it. There's a moment in every silence where something shifts. It's the moment the silence stops being about space and starts being about truth. At first, silence is intentional. It's a choice, a tactic, a defense mechanism. But eventually, silence stops feeling controlled and starts feeling revealing. There comes a night when he's lying awake, staring at the ceiling, or maybe scrolling through. He phones from the dark. And something inside him cracks. Not loudly, just enough for the truth to leak through. He'll wonder why it still bothers him, why he still checks your page, why he still pauses when he sees something that reminds him of you, why there's still a sting in his chest when he imagines you moving on without him. And it's confusing because he told himself he was done. He made himself believe that silence meant strength, but now the silence feels like a weight he can't set down. That's the moment silence stops being a wall and becomes a mirror. He's forced to look at himself without distraction, forced to face what he suppressed, forced to acknowledge what he avoided, while pretending he was fine. And in that mirror, he sees the truth he tried to bury. Carl Jung wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." And he's been doing exactly that. Avoiding discomfort, avoiding pain, avoiding vulnerability, avoiding the realization that he walked away not because he didn't care, but because caring scared him more than losing did. Silence exposes the places where emotional maturity hasn't been reached. It exposes the gaps he tried to cover with pride. It reveals what was real and what was fear. He thought he was protecting himself by going quiet, by stepping back, by pretending he didn't feel anything. But now, he sees that silence didn't save him. It stranded him. He's stuck somewhere between what he feels and what he's afraid to admit. That's why he gets uneasy when he sees you smiling. That's why he gets tense when you look happy. That's why he reacts, even if he pretends not to. Because silence doesn't erase emotion, it magnifies it. He might start to rationalize. He might tell himself he'll reach out tomorrow, or next week, or when the moment feels right. He'll rehearse what he would say, then delete the message before sending it. He'll think about calling, but his pride will hang over him like a guard at a locked door. He'll imagine you answering, but he'll also fear you won't. Silence becomes an emotional purgatory, a space where everything is felt, but nothing is said. And then he begins to wonder, something he never expected. What if you're not waiting anymore? What if you finally let go? What if someone else sees what he didn't? That thought hits harder than any breakup. Because losing someone after they're still reaching for you is one thing, but losing someone after they stopped is something else entirely. It's a quiet devastation, a private collapse. He starts replaying moments he never valued enough, the small things he ignored, the effort he didn't match, the softness he took for granted, the access he assumed would always be there. He remembers the way you listened when he needed space to think, the way you understood him without forcing him to explain, the way your presence felt like home even when life was messy. And he begins to see something he refused to see before. That what he lost wasn't just a relationship, it was safety, a rare connection, a once-in-a-lifetime alignment. And that realization isn't loud. It doesn't come in fireworks. It comes quietly like a whisper he can't shake. He starts to feel the hollowness in the silence he built. He starts to see that silence wasn't strength. It was a shield that kept him from growing. Meanwhile, something powerful is happening on your side. The silence that once felt heavy starts to feel light. The ache begins to dissolve. The longing begins to fade. You start living again. Not pretending, but truly living. You rediscover the parts of yourself that existed long before him. You feel the shift within your soul. One day, you realize you didn't think about him, and it doesn't hurt. You're not waiting for anything. You're not wondering anymore. You're not holding your breath for a message that may never arrive. You reach a depth of peace that silence gifts only to the brave. You learn that closure isn't given. Closure is built. You learn that strength isn't found in holding on. It's found in releasing. You learn that silence isn't abandonment. Sometimes silence is transformation. Your silence becomes your boundary. Your silence becomes your healing. Your silence becomes your proof that moving forward doesn't require noise. It requires maturity. And emotional maturity isn't about who speaks first. It's about who grows. He thought silence would keep the connection alive, but silence freed you. And that freedom is something he never prepared himself to witness, because now he feels it. The shift, the final severing, the emotional cord breaks, not with words, but with stillness. He can sense the distance, not in what you do, but in what you no longer feel compelled to do. He feels the space between you widen. And for the first time, it's not because he asked for it. It's because you chose it. That's when silence becomes agony. That's when silence becomes regret. That's when silence becomes the unraveling of everything he thought he had control over. Because silence without attachment is peaceful, but silence with unresolved emotion is torture. He might convince himself it's too late to reach out. He might tell himself you're better off. He might try to rebuild a version of life that doesn't include you, but nothing replaces the space you occupied. People don't replace people. They replace habits, and habits don't heal hearts. He may pretend he's moved on. He may stay silent to appear strong, but inside he'll carry the quiet ache of what he lost. The memory of your presence becomes the ghost that silence cannot bury. And here is the truth he'll learn when it's too late. Silence is not neutral. Silence is a decision. Silence is a message. Silence is a confession. Silence is where the truth finally speaks. You learn that closure isn't given. Closure is built. You learn that strength isn't found in holding on. It's found in releasing. You learn that silence is an abandonment. Sometimes silence is transformation. Your silence becomes your boundary. Your silence becomes your healing. Your silence becomes your proof that moving forward doesn't require noise. It requires maturity. And emotional maturity isn't about who speaks first. It's about who grows. He thought silence would keep the connection alive, but silence freed you. And that freedom is something he never prepared himself to witness, because now he feels it. The shift, the final severing, the emotional cord breaks not with words, but with stillness. He can sense the distance, not in what you do, but in what you no longer feel compelled to do. He feels the space between you widen. And for the first time, it's not because he asked for it. It's because you chose it. That's when silence becomes agony. That's when silence becomes regret. That's when silence becomes the unraveling of everything he thought he had control over. Because silence without attachment is peaceful. But silence with unresolved emotion is torture. He might convince himself it's too late to reach out. He might tell himself you're better off. He might try to rebuild a version of life that doesn't include you. But nothing replaces the space you occupied. People don't replace people. They replace habits. And habits don't heal hearts. He may pretend he's moved on. He may stay silent to appear strong. But inside, he'll carry the quiet ache of what he lost. The memory of your presence becomes the ghost that silence cannot bury. And here's the truth he'll learn when it's too late. Silence is not neutral. Silence is a decision. Silence is a message. Silence is a confession. Silence is where the truth finally speaks. There comes a point where silence stops being a space for reflection and becomes the final verdict. Not because anyone said the words out loud, but because the silence changed shape. What once felt like uncertainty becomes clarity. What once felt like waiting becomes release. Silence becomes the place where the truth settles, even without explanation, for him. That moment often arrives quietly. Maybe it's a random morning when he picks up his phone and instinctively scrolls, expecting to feel your presence somewhere in the margins of his life. Maybe it's a night when he goes out with friends, surrounded by noise and laughter, only to feel the emptiness that hides underneath. Maybe it's when he sees someone who smiles like you did, or hears a phrase you used to say, and suddenly his heart sinks with a weight he can't ignore, and he realizes something devastating. He isn't avoiding you anymore. He's missing you. There's a difference between silence used for coping and silence born out of loss. At first, silence was his method, his shield, his control. But now, silence feels like a consequence, like cost, like the price he didn't expect to pay. When he opens your messages, they're gone. When he types your name, it doesn't appear. When he looks at your page, it's no longer filled with traces of longing or sadness. It's filled with light, with movement, with life. You're smiling differently. Your energy has changed. You're no longer holding a space for someone who didn't know how to stay. You've stepped out of the waiting room, and he feels the shift like a punch. He thought silence would keep a thread between you. He thought the attachment would remain even without effort. He thought distance could be controlled. But now, silence has turned into separation. Not the separation that comes from two people being angry or confused, but the separation that comes from one person healing. Healing is quiet. Healing doesn't announce itself. Healing doesn't beg to be seen. One day you wake up and nothing hurts the way it used to. One day the memory stops burning. One day the thought of him no longer shakes in your voice. One day, the silence that once felt like abandonment becomes peace. You begin to understand that you didn't lose anything. You release something that wasn't willing to hold you properly. You begin to see that you didn't ruin anything. You simply outgrew the version of yourself that needed proof you were enough. You begin to feel that silence isn't empty, it's space. Space was needed to return to yourself, and that transformation is what he never expected. Because in his mind, you would always be there, waiting in the wings, orbiting his life, holding on to hope. He assumed your emotional presence was permanent. He believed your softness would always cushion his silence. He thought time would freeze while he figured himself out. He never imagined time would move without him. And when he finally feels the full magnitude of that realization, he comes with a grief he never saw coming. The grief of losing someone not because there was no love, but because love wasn't supported by courage. Losing someone because pride spoke louder than honesty. Losing someone not to another person, but to oneself. That's the pain silence delivers, not the pain of conflict. Conflict has words, tears, and closure, but the pain of realization, quiet, private, irreversible. Silence begins to haunt him in small ways. He sees a picture of you smiling, and something inside him collapses, not because you're happy, but because he's no longer part of the world that created that happiness. He hears from someone that you've changed, that you're glowing now and it stings. He hears you were out, laughing freely, and he wonders when the shift happened, when you stopped needing him, when you stopped looking back, when he stopped being the weight you carried. And in that moment, he finally feels what you once felt, the ache of loving someone in silence. But your silence isn't punishment. It isn't revenge. It isn't manipulation. It is acceptance. The acceptance that you can love someone and still walk away. The acceptance that some doors must remain closed for peace to exist. The acceptance that not everything unfinished needs to be reopened. You learned something powerful. You don't need someone's presence to validate your worth. You don't need someone's attention to feel chosen. You don't need someone's words to know your value. You learned that real strength is respecting silence, not breaking it out of fear. Real strength is letting the truth rise without forcing answers. Real strength is leaving the room with dignity instead of begging someone to stay. But the story doesn't end with his regret. It ends with your rebirth. Silence gave you back your power. It gave you space to rebuild, to rediscover the version of yourself that existed before you gave so much away. It gave you time to grow into someone who no longer needs validation from anyone who fails to choose you. And now, when you look back, you don't see loss. You see transformation. You see a chapter that shaped you. You see a lesson disguised as heartbreak. You see strength where there once was pain. And he sees something else. The woman he took for granted has disappeared. In her place stands a woman he can no longer reach. He will feel compelled to return, not to ask for closure, but to see if there is still a doorway left open. He might send a simple message. Hey, how have you been? Not because he's casual, but because he doesn't know how to say what he really means. He might resurface with friendliness, but beneath the light words sits a storm of regret. He will attempt to start small, hoping you will open the door, but he will feel something he never expected. Fear. Fear of finding out the answer he never wanted. Fear that you've truly moved on. Fear that someone else is holding what he never expected. Afraid that you've really let go. Afraid someone else is holding the things he left behind. Afraid silence has done what time couldn't. He chose to stay silent, thinking it would protect him, but the silence protected you. Now, silence speaks for both of you. It says everything without a word. It draws the final line without any fight. It ends the story that pride wanted to keep telling. Because the real breakup didn't happen the day he left. The real breakup happened when you were not looking back anymore.